huge. Just to set the frame, how long was that? Because I think a lot of people are
a year I worked on this.
A year.
Like
let's just hammer that home really quick. And I feel like if there was like editing like Teddy, I'd be like, dude, just say like a year, say that like 100 times so that really sinks into people.
Literally from January through December.
Yeah.
The weight hasn't necessarily come off. You're not necessarily where you want to be body composition wise, but maybe energy and digestion are regulated. That's step number one. Where do you go from that? Without adding too much, you work on food. You go back to the basics, work on moving. You make small little steps, and you see if those changes net a positive result. And if they don't, you keep looking for, I call them healing opportunities.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the All In podcast. As always, brought to you by our good friends at FitAid, Cured Nutrition, IN3 Formulations, and First Form. It's a first. We got all of our staff in one building. We pulled two of them away, and we podcasted hard. Shout out to Mind Pump, stealing your line. But guys, today we're talking gut health, and we're talking gut health in a completely different realm than you are expecting it. We're actually talking about a case study with our very own Kendalle, social media manager extraordinaire, content manager, jack of all trades, total ninja badass, supporting us on the back end. But as a boss, it's been really cool to see her progress inside of our company, but also to see her progress personally and overcome some gut health issues. And so inside of this podcast, you're going to learn how she overcame some pretty gnarly issues in a very unconventional manner. It is not what you're expecting. You need to listen. And I'm telling you need to listen multiple times because there's so many nuggets that come out that are implementable right away, today, right now, this minute. So get a notepad, get a pen, and take some notes. Enjoy. We'll talk to you next week. All right, guys, starting this podcast a little differently today. Just want to acknowledge the fact that we just got news that Becky Conselman has passed away. And I didn't spend a ton of time with her, but the little interactions I did have, be it at the CrossFit Games, be it at CrossFit events, she attended several of my seminars. I was fortunate enough to help her with her nutrition at some point. I don't even have words, and I'm never really short on words, but just the volume and the quality of the person that she is will never be forgotten. I think a lot of people that have listened to this podcast have at some point been touched by something she was influential in, and so I just want to use this platform to at least acknowledge and send our prayers and our thoughts to her family and her friends, and acknowledge one of the best people that the CrossFit industry has ever been blessed with. And, may Becky rest in peace. So wanted to get that out there. But today, on a much more positive note, we are talking gut health. And it's a really interesting topic. Full transparency, I didn't even want to do the podcast because I believe that this topic is so bastardized. And so what we have done is we've brought in Kendalle, who, for some of you guys that do not know, manages all of our media, all of our content, does so many things behind the scenes, and also coaches a lot of individuals. If you guys go to the blog, you'll see some before and afters that she's been a part of. And we've also brought Travis in, who you guys know wrote the Gut Health Master Course for the Nutritional Coaching Institute. And when we started talking about how this would go, we started immediately talking tactics and what people needed to hear. And I think that you guys are going to be extremely surprised at how we go about this. And so first and foremost, Kendalle, what prompted the journey? Why did we even need to dig into gut health? Like, obviously everyone knows like digestion and bloating and all that shit. Like, of course that's going to prompt you to get into gut health. But like, what was happening in your life?
So a little bit of a backstory. Jason had coached me for about, I think we met technically over the phone in like early 2015, 2015.
Right. Yeah.
And at that point in time, I was able to manage a lot of my life stressors. I didn't have much. I was able to control my schedule. I was working for myself, but I was able to control a lot, even though I was training twice a day. I was adequately fueled. Like, I didn't tank myself. I was all good. End of 20, I guess it would be very end of 2017 now. I'm not very open about this with a ton of people, so now I'm going to say it on a podcast. I think all the team knows, but I was blindsided by my ex-husband cheating. Went through a divorce at 29, which is, not necessarily in the life plan. And as Jason knows very extensively, my whole life, like, it blew up. I had to move. I was living abroad in England. I had to move back to the States, had like $20 in my bank account. It was a wreck. And I had to support a house, had no job, had to walk away from everything. So my personal life was in the shitter. Do we curse on this podcast?
Do you know who I am?
Yes, I know.
Was that really a question?
I know. Personal life was in the shitter. So thankful Jason and Nicole gave me the job of posting to Instagram last year. And then, luckily at that point, that job has, quadrupled. And now I only work for the company, but by June I had 4 jobs to support a house. I was so stressed out. I was so anxious. I was depressed. I couldn't eat some days. Some days I was just so fucking stressed out, and I couldn't even track a macro. And I remember telling Jason, we were getting on our coaching calls, I was like, I don't even have the energy to input anything into MyFitnessPal. I don't have the bandwidth to do this. And I'd never felt like that before in 3 or 4 years. And I didn't know what to do. I was completely off my rocker.
And so, excuse me. So with that happening, right? Obviously, we've all been in situations in life where shit's just kind of gone sideways. Maybe not those extremes, right?
Yeah.
But everything goes sideways, and we all are familiar with the lack of appetite or the inability to desire to track or any of those things. But physically, what symptoms were you kind of experiencing? Because this is where I think the gray area starts to come in, right? I think a lot of people are looking at they're not looking at that, right? When even though it's massively present, and they're looking at that as being mutually exclusive relative to the other symptoms of physical illness almost inside of your guts. And so what symptoms were you presenting at that point?
I'd always had skin issues, but they blew up to the point where I didn't want to walk out of the house without makeup on. Some days I didn't want to go out of the house. At first, bloating and stuff wasn't a huge deal. But I daily movements, shall we say, were not prime. And then though it kind of snowballed at the end of last year, where I was just retaining water all the time. I was bloated all the time. I was putting on weight, and I didn't really know why, because even though I wasn't tracking, I'm not the type of person to just go off the deep end and eat fried food. You've seen my food logs for how long? I eat quality food. So I was just well, what the hell? I'm not doing anything different.
Yep.
Granted, I hadn't trained in about 6 months, so maybe my intake was slightly higher than it needed to be, but the type of weight I was putting on and the type of bloat and water retention I was having, I was this makes no sense.
Yeah.
And I was uncomfortable every day. I needed to be by a toilet.
It kind of went, from the outside looking in on my end, it kind of went 0 to 60 overnight.
It did.
And
it did.
There was no progression. There was no, hey, this might be happening.
Mm-hmm.
It was wake up one day, literally my guts feel completely fucked. I need to be near a toilet because I might shit so much that I don't want to leave the bathroom, or I might not shit for 4 days.
Yep.
And it's I don't want to eat certain things because I will want to just curl up in the fetal position. Yeah. And this is on top of all the life stress that was also happening, right?
Yep.
So now it's just adding, from a coach perspective, it's just adding stressors, right? The stressors we couldn't control was the divorce and the shit that was coming your way. And obviously, as a company, we try to support the finance, but as a coach, you can't support finance, right? And so it's that was the foundational level of stress that existed in your life, and this was just on top of it. And that's when I think that it was okay. And it's at this point that I think so many listeners can relate. Yeah. I think so many listeners can listen to this and be okay, I have a foundational level of stress in my life that is somewhat uncontrollable. And then the gut health is only adding to that. Mm-hmm. And this is when I think a lot of them are seeking out somebody like Travis. And so Travis is sitting here as well on the podcast. Travis, say hi, because you haven't got to talk yet.
Hello, everyone.
We're dickheads, and we take over all the conversation.
He has the best radio voice, though.
I'm just sitting and listening and taking it all in. In a mental
Welcome
sense.
to Delilah on Saturday night. But, dude, like, at that point, you know, I think that you're starting to see people present those symptoms to you in a lack of context, right? And I mean, absolutely, had you come to Travis and I and you said, hey, this is what I have going on, I would have 100% in that moment been like, talk to Travis. Because he knows far more about gut health than I ever will. Nor, like, I don't ever want to become that educated on gut health. Like, just facts, right? The dude's a fucking genius when it comes to it. But I think so many people are compartmentalizing those symptoms.
Yep.
And they're saying, well, I can't shit, or it's irregular, or blah, 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 right? Absolutely, at that point, there needs to be an intervention. I think, and Travis, I would love your opinion on this. Like, I think what is often misunderstood is the foundation that lives below that. And correcting that first before you even dig into other tactical and practical steps on gut health. Like, so is there like a hierarchy that you go by? Like, walk us through your thoughts when you're hearing Kendalle kind of like recount all of this.
Well, as she'd start off, you always have to assess stress right off the bat. And you can't really say anything's going to be fixed by giving someone a probiotic or working on cleaner foods or making sure you're going to the bathroom by not handling the elephant in the room. And I think that is one factor that's misunderstood by people, that they come and they think that, oh, I can take some bone broth, or I can do a fast, or I'll go on a fast mimicking diet and everything's just going to be okay. And unfortunately, unless you get those factors in control, stress, sleep, diet, and exercise sometimes don't have the effect that a person wants. And that's a hard fact to explain to someone, and to tell someone that you might be working with them for a long period of time before they really see what they want. And ultimately what that's going to be is feeling better, having a good sex drive, and losing weight and being comfortable in their body. And fortunately, those are like the last things that come when someone comes to you with a really messed up gut.
And I think inside of that, everybody wants to believe that they're mutually exclusive, though. I think that a lot of people are saying, well, the reason I don't have sex drive, the reason I don't have energy, the reason, and this is what the media is telling them, right? Like, this is what's happening out there, is so many, well, fuck it, I'll just bluntly say it, so many fucking stupid coaches that are literally like, hey, your guts are fucked up, like, let's lead with gut health. Like, no, motherfucker, you don't need to lead with gut health. You need to lead with, like, controlling your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I think this segues perfectly, because a lot of people, right, because here we are and we've really moved past a lot of your issues, right? And
yeah.
The reason we're doing the podcast today is to talk about how we ultimately got you through this. And so everyone's like, okay, how the hell did you guys do it? Because that's a shitstorm of a situation. And so I would love for you on your end to share, because I think, too, at that moment, you were caught in the trap of the media saying, Kendalle, like, there's this gut health fix, and you should do bone broth, and you should do this, and you should do that. And you're like, and I vividly remember our calls, and I'm like, Kendalle, don't track anything. Just chill and sleep, right? And, like, our calls were so simple, but I 100% believe set a foundation of you truly understanding that this whole thing is part of a lifestyle, not just individual fixes. So I'd love for you to tell everybody kind of your, how your mindset around it all.
Yeah. So, I mean, this also goes back to, like, even coaches have coaches. Like, I kind of beat myself up a little bit being like, well, I'm a coach. Why can't I figure this out? But I mean, I remember vividly having a conversation with Travis at the Austin NCI level 1 last January. And he was basically like, until your stress is in line, like, get your stress in line, get your stress in line, get your stress in line. And it wasn't honestly until I was sleeping through the night and I just got my stress, like, I found a way to get my stress in line. Even though the stress was still there, I stopped CrossFitting.
Shocker.
And I mean, honestly, shout out to Brian Borstein's program, because I was able to still move and not run myself into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first program where I was like, oh, I can do this a couple days a week. And like,
Yep.
I'm not going to like run my CNS into the ground. I'm not going to hit my hormones into the
Fair
ground.
play. How hard of a transition was that?
Really hard,
Yep.
especially because I still like run open gym at a CrossFit gym and I watch everybody.
Yeah. I mean, this was like this past open, I didn't do one of the open workouts, and it was the first time ever since I started doing CrossFit, which is, I believe, 2012-ish, maybe 2013. Like, this is the first time I hadn't done an open. And, like, every week I was tempted. And, like, even the last one, which in my opinion was the stupidest fucking open workout ever, like, I wanted, everything in me wanted to go do it. So I get it. Like, it's hard.
Yeah, it was because I had CrossFitted. I mean, I had coached CrossFit for a little over 2 years. I had done it myself for about 5 years. But at least Brian's program let me kind of live in a happy medium. Like, I lift at like a really steady state, and then we get a little finisher that like doesn't kill you.
Sure.
But there was a point where I couldn't. I even had to completely stop training. Like, even though I knew it was gonna result in me not looking how I wanted to look, I didn't step foot in a gym. I slept. I like being up early to work, but I had to let myself, and I understand I have the luxury a lot of people don't have. If that alarm goes off at 6 and I was like feeling like I couldn't get up, I would go back to sleep. I was getting like 10, 12 hours of sleep. Sleep was huge.
Just to set the frame, how long was that? Because I think a lot of people are
a
like,
year
well,
I worked on this.
A year.
Like
let's just hammer that home really quick. And I feel like if there was like editing, like Teddy, I'd be like, dude, just say like a year, say that like 100 times so that really sinks into people.
Literally from January through December.
Yeah.
Last year.
Literally a full calendar year. And I think so many people look at this, and this is the foundational shit.
Yep.
This isn't like the bone broth and the pills and whatever else. This is literally the foundational, controlling your stress, setting a foundation of a lifestyle that allows future protocols to be successful. And we're talking about 12 fucking months.
Yep.
We're talking about 12 months of sleeping more, not training, like having FOMO like a motherfucker, of like seeing people train, seeing people talk about their results. Because let's be honest, physically it's very easy. It is very easy to sit your ass on a couch.
Yep.
Like, I promise you, there is not a person that is listening to this podcast that physically, mind you, like, unless they're disabled, right? And I have a lot of respect for them. But unless they are disabled, physically sitting your ass on a couch is not difficult. Mentally, it's fucking difficult.
Yeah.
Like, there's a ton of mental stress that goes in. And I promise you, the first 3 months of you going through that, mentally, you still had a shit ton of stress.
I did. And it was hard because I was like the friend that worked out. Like, that was part of my identity. That's what people knew me for.
Yep.
And I'm like telling my clients how to do their training, and I'm here sitting on the couch like, well, fuck. Like,
yeah.
I'm not but I was laying the foundation that I preach to people that they have to lay first. Yeah. But yeah, solid 12 months. I mean, me and you worked on like the basics.
Yeah.
It was basics. Sleep, de-stress, focus on food quality as much as I could.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until we hammered all the basics that something was off.
Then we started looking at like calories and protein. But like at no point did we ever get in full on macro prescription.
Nope.
It was like we discussed calories, we discussed a little bit of protein prescription. But it was at that point that I felt like, okay, everything is in line. You're able to commit to this. Like you're actually hitting numbers consistently. And it's like, okay, now let's bring in the tactical side of things, right? And so, Travis, at that point, we had, we'd laid a foundation of what I believe to be success. I think we made it so that you could actually do your job. And like, what did you observe at that point differently than your first conversation with Kendalle? And what were you observing that like tactically led you into this, like the beginning of this repair?
You can be honest.
Well, in the beginning, it was sleep was the biggest factor that we needed to really get under control and at least a good pattern down. As if there's anything that needs to be fixed before a gut can heal, it's getting someone's circadian rhythm in line with, the sunlight. So that was the first factor, managing stress. And there were many times where I would talk to you, Kendalle, and I'd say, how are things going? And I could still tell that it was there. The stress, financial, work, everything was there, and it still needed to be managed a little bit better. And at those times, I told you, it's my favorite phrase is sometimes you have to learn to make lemonade out of lemons. You make a bad situation as good as you can. And until you got to that point, I knew that there was going to be issues. But at that point, when we finally chatted and you're like, listen, my food's good, I'm doing this, I'm active, I'm moving, I'm sleeping okay, that was a point where we dove into more specifics, more symptoms. And that's why we did some testing and figured some things out. And, we'll go through it. Your test was, almost an anomaly. That's why you can't always use a test as a sample, because one of her tests, we tested her gut stool, which looks at a lot of markers. It was one of the best ones I'd ever seen. And, here she is saying,
So let me ask you this, though. Do you think if we had tested that same test prior to her controlling all the stressors that you would have seen something different?
Oh, entirely. I will just have to always say that, I use functional testing quite a bit, but functional testing is still just a bunch of numbers on a piece of paper.
Agreed.
You have to look at person's symptoms and correlate those symptoms along with the testing. And in some situations, they don't always line up. So you have to go with your gut and say, listen, obviously this person's still having some issues, that there might be something somewhere else in the body that we need to look at.
Agreed.
So it was really sleep. It was food quality. There was many times, Kendalle, we talk where, she was not feeling the best, and there were still things that she was eating that could have been triggers. I'm like, hey, you want to be tight? You want to know what's going on? You got to buckle down and, be clean on certain things for a certain period of time to know if those food items are causing a problem or not. And I remember us having quite a few discussions and almost coming to tears a few times about me saying,
you did make me cry.
About saying,
a common theme here.
Of, listen, you can't eat that. And what do you mean? That's going to take away from my social interactions. And I understand that, but there comes a time where you got to buckle down and figure out what's a trigger and what's not.
And that was huge for me, the social thing, because I had just gotten my social life back. So mentally, even though I was feeling better, the mental side of working up to what Travis wanted me to do took a long time, because I was like, well, I just getting my life back. And now you're telling me.
So that's a really good point. And there's so many people that are listening to this right now that probably need to look at whatever they need to do dietarily, not even in a gut health discussion, but in a dietary intervention setting, that really need to separate the dietary goals and the social goals and understand where they're going to give on either side of those. What helped you move past that? Because I think it's one of the biggest roadblocks we all see as coaches with our clients.
Honestly, I think I just realized it wasn't that big of a deal. I could go to a restaurant and be like, hey, I can't have gluten and dairy. Like, I made it work everywhere, and I still went out.
Sure.
And maybe I couldn't control the oil they were cooking in, and I took it down to once or twice a week instead of, more than that. But I made it work, and I cut, and I'm not a big drinker, but I cut that out and realized it wasn't a big deal going out, but it took me, I had to ease myself into it. Probably over the course of like 6 weeks, I was like, okay, this week I'm not going to have this. All right, this week I'm not. And I eased myself into it. But it was a huge mental battle for me. Just the soul. It was a trigger. And also restriction for me is a trigger. Restriction for me is a mental trigger because I do have an eating disorder background.
Well, I think restriction for everybody is a trigger.
Yeah, it's a huge trigger for me.
I think so many, and this is a whole nother, this literally will probably be our next Thursday Thoughts podcast. I think so many people try to play a game of subtraction when we should be playing a game of addition, right? Far too many people try to win the game of subtraction, and that's never going to fucking win. Restriction is absolutely the worst mindset, especially in the dietary world, right? Just entering into this journey, you were scared. Yeah. Because fundamentally, you're like, okay, I'm presented with 29 years old, right? You're presented with all of these fucking symptoms that you're like, okay, I've gone 29 years of my life and I've never had this. And it's like, what am I doing? We don't feel like we're supposed to be learning something brand new about ourselves at 29 years of age, but it's a very scary process.
Yeah, but I realize what helped me is realize I don't have to eat this way forever. he's asking me 60 days. I was like, all right, Travis, I can give you 60 days. Like, I'll do it. I can give you 60 days. And I just finally was like,
props to Travis, because that's a really good coach. Like, I don't know, dude, if you had intentions of going past 60 days, or if you were literally just like, hey, here's a time frame that you can commit to. Like, we're recording this on Sunday morning. Let's see. I can't get my phone. Sunday morning, April 7th, right? And so last night was the NCAA Final Four. And I listened to an interview with one of the Texas Tech players after their game. And he said, we were always confident. Our coach says, play this game 4 minutes at a time. And if you win every 4 minutes, you will have won the whole game. And I really liked that because, you know, it's basically 5 40-minute games in each half for them to try to win. And so, Trav, like, what was the mindset of you saying commit for 60 days? Like, was it literally you thought you'd see change in 60 days? Was it just trying to facilitate short-term compliance? Like, what did that look like?
It's a little bit of both, but in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to food can be a big trigger. And people sometimes don't realize how good they feel until they remove those triggers. And sometimes 30 days isn't enough. So my goal is to get them to clean the slate, eat clean, remove inflammation, get any inflammatory foods out of the system for a long period of time. And then after we know that situation's been rectified or they've been, you know, in essence, out of the system, then we can slowly introduce foods and see how they react to those singular foods. And if someone is eating gluten and they eat it, or let's say they're not eating gluten for 60 days and all of a sudden they eat it and they have terrible reactions, then that's probably a food that they need to remove. But sometimes there's foods like eggs or dairy or grains that just give people bad reactions. And at that point, I don't think it's an enzymatic reduction over a 60-day period, but you want to have them feeling better. So what are you doing to help them feel better? And you're trying to find that mix.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so eloquently stated. I mean, I think there's just a blend of tactical advice that you have to be able to give to your clients, and then you also have to know how to coach your clients. You know, I mean, we pride ourselves on, you know, saying we're nutrition coaches, right? We don't ever claim to be nutritionists or RDs or any of that shit. And I believe that the word coach really has a strong and profound impact on the way in which we handle things. And so it's cool to hear the technical side of what you're trying to implement, but also to hear like the personal side and that personal connection. And it's cool. I mean, this is really, like, we've never done anything like this. It's cool to hear, Kendalle, like, you get to talk about, like, what was it like going through that? You know, you're like, okay, 60 days, I can do it. And so for all the coaches out there, you're listening to this, it's like, okay, well, maybe start thinking about the fact that, like, at day number 60, you know, that stop trying to give your clients 90-day, 120-day, 180-day protocols, and just get them to think, like, okay, I can make this change for a week at a time, 2 weeks at a time, a month at a time. I can't tell you how many times I've had a client going sideways, and I'm like, hey, you know what? For the next 7 days, can you just do me a favor and eat protein 4 times a day? That's it, right? And, like, that simple victory starts this massive movement of momentum. And so at that moment, you committed for 60 days and you built momentum. Like, what happened next?
I felt great. It was the best because I also, going back, I had my gallbladder taken out at 18. So I've always had digestion issues just because I never sorted that out because I didn't know what I was doing. So I've never felt 100% digestion wise. So at the end of that 60 days, that was the best because I'm going to be 31 in June. So 13 years that I had felt. It was the best I'd felt. Now, like, so I think I ended my 60 days actually last week, right when I came here to work for a week. So, like, food's been a little out of the norm. So I did have some things that I didn't have in those 60 days, and I might be dealing with some water retention from some of them, but and travel always throws my digestion for some reason, like my travel days, or I don't know. I think
it does that to everybody. I think there's like osmotic imbalances. Like, the only way I've circumvented it is like over consuming water on a plane, but then even that I've run into issues like blood pressure. So
I was talking to Michael's wife Trish about this the other day. I was like, so fasting when I travel is like the only thing that like really helps me.
That
like,
helps me too.
Really helps me. And I do every 2 weeks a 24-hour water fast still. And that's done. You implemented that last year. Like, when I couldn't do anything, you're like, hey, once, twice a month, can you do the water fast?
Yep.
And that like worked wonders. I, as an experiment, did 48 hours one time. And
Did you hate your life?
I did.
Did you at least have coffee?
I had a little bit of coffee in the morning, but every day I basically went and got 8 venti iced teas from Starbucks.
That's fair.
Like literally the passion
listen,
green iced
if you got
teas.
no food in your life, you gotta have something to look
Like
forward
it just
to.
gives you some good flavor.
Yeah,
but
well, that's the thing. It's always flavor related.
yeah, so I've dealt with a little like digestion wasn't great when I traveled, but then all of a sudden it was really good, even though my fiber was low. So we're trying, like, I'm basically getting back to like how I was eating, because this week's just been a little wonky with being here for the first time. But now I'm pretty much trying to just stick to how I was eating because I felt great. Yeah. And then I think we're going to try, haven't actually been in a deficit tracked for over a year.
And so let's touch on that really quickly, because I think a lot of people think that fixing their gut health issues or fixing whatever other issues are present, it can be done concurrently with trying to achieve body composition goals. And I'm going to openly state that it's not a good idea. Not saying it can't be done, right? I don't want to make that blanket statement because there's going to be zealots that are like, you're crazy. No, like it absolutely can be done, right?
Yeah.
It's not optimal. And unless you're a physique competitor and you have a deadline, like there's no deadlines in life. There's no deadline for you to look the way you want to look. There's absolutely this marathon that we call life that exists. And so setting the stage of success and setting the foundation of success, now you've built the ability to do anything you want to do. If you want to perform better, you could probably perform better. If you want to look better, you can look better. If you want to live to be 200 years old, like you can pursue that now. But you had to have this prerequisite of success, right? Of balance, of health.
Yeah.
And so trying to fix your gut health, we go back to the very beginning of this conversation, we had to remove all of your stressors. And yet living in a calorie deficit, we know, is one of the biggest stressors that you can encounter, because you're fundamentally setting yourself up with an inability to recover.
Yep.
And so I think so many people need to like re-listen to everything we just said and start connecting all of the dots.
Yep.
I think so many people think it's this very complicated, convoluted thing, when in reality it starts, it's everything IN3 has been talking about lately, it starts with basics.
Yep.
We all have to take a step back and get back to basics.
Yep. And so, I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say, like, while I was going through that 60 days, like, why isn't the weight coming off? Like, why isn't it coming off? Like, why isn't this happening?
Of course.
But I was like, well, because if I'd be lying if I didn't say, like, I mean, it's been mentally a mind fuck to have to just be like, I got to deal with this weight until I fix my gut. And it's not a fun place to be at all. Travis has heard me be like, I'm uncomfortable. And he's been great at just being like, you got to do the gut. And then now only are we going to do a macro and a slight deficit, see what happens. If nothing happens, then we know we maybe need to go down a different kind of like maybe a 2-week liver reset, but only after we've exhausted every basic option. Because I've been eating great foods, but I'm not in a deficit. Right. I know I'm not. And I'm like sitting here being like, why isn't the weight coming off? Like, well, I'm not doing the basic go into a slight deficit. So that's...
And there's so many ways you can achieve that. I mean, we can increase activity levels. We can...
And this is my first month in over a year. We can actually
track food intake. Like, there's so many things that can now be done.
Yeah.
And so... so Travis, like at this point, where does Kendalle go from here? What does the next 6 months, 12 months look like for her?
Well, it's the one thing that you always need to understand is even when let's say you fix a gut problem, these problems sometimes they're not always singular. They're always interconnected. So if there's a gut problem, sometimes there's a hormonal connection. Sometimes there's a liver connection. If you're not digesting your food, sometimes there's a nutrient deficiency, issue that you have to deal with. And just by fixing, feeling a little bit better in the gut doesn't mean it's going to fix everything else. So the important point is going forward is keeping in line with what you've done and what's worked. Okay, so Kendalle, I could say that, the weight hasn't necessarily come off. You're not necessarily where you want to be body composition wise, but maybe energy and digestion are regulated. That's step number one. Where do you go from that? Without adding too much, you work on food. You go back to the basics. You work on moving. You make small little steps, and you see if those changes net a positive result. And if they don't, you keep looking for, I call them healing opportunities, and keep going from there. And it's going to depend on the person's mindset. Like, you can't unload 50 things at one time, or you're just going to lose a person.
Well, I think right there you just nailed it. And I think that's literally, that's a great place for us to start wrapping up this podcast. Is it's going to depend on an individual's mindset. And so everyone that's listening to this, there's two types of people that tend to listen to this podcast. There's clients and there's coaches. And if you're a prospective client, or you're looking at fixing any issue in your life, not even just gut health, understand that there's probably a foundation that needs to be fixed before you even get into all the crazy tactical bullshit. And that when you get into the tactical shit, that it's likely a process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. We talked about fixing Kendall's foundation for 12 fucking months, right? If you're a coach, understand throwing the kitchen sink at your clients, not going to work. It's going to overwhelm them. It's going to scare them. It is going to push them away. It's going to lead them down a rabbit hole of another failed pursuit of success, which is likely why they're coming to you in the first place, because they failed so many things. And so I just think that this, as we get into a topic that is so complex, we literally just had the simplest conversation for 40 minutes.
Yep.
And people don't want it to be that simple. People want it to be sexier. People want to talk about, well, here's this cleanse that you did, and this bone broth, and this, fucking kombucha, and whatever else. They want all this crazy shit. And yet the truth is, it was always at their fingertips. They just never had the patience nor the headspace to implement something so simple.
Right, because until after 12 months, it was at that point where it wasn't an added stressor.
Right.
To even any nutritional protocol was a stressor.
Right.
I couldn't handle it.
It starts adding value to your life instead
right.
of taking away from your life. And I think as a coach, we all have to recognize, listen, it was never easy for me to get on a call and be like, all right, Kendall, don't change anything. Don't track anymore. Just once a week, don't eat. As a coach, you literally feel like you have no validation, right? I would get off those calls and be like, Jesus, am I even adding value? But then I would have to take a step back and be like, you know what? I am. Because any more than that, it would be ruining her.
Yeah.
And so I think there's so many coaches out there that need to listen to this and be like, wow, what am I really doing from a coaching perspective?
Yeah.
I think that's super important.
And I think, without that just basic accountability, I don't think I'd be where I am today, where I'm not crashing in the afternoon. I can sleep through the night. I can wake up and not be like, oh my God, I have to have coffee.
Right.
I like coffee, so that's why I drink it. But I was waking up and be like, oh my God, I need coffee. 3 p.m. Oh my God, I'm crashing. Waking up multiple times through the night. And this is the first time. It took a year to not feel like that. So now I've trained for 4 weeks straight for the first time in over a year. And I'm not killing myself. I end my workouts not feeling like I need to go take a nap. It's a great feeling. So this is the first time I have felt good in over a year.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And in large part, congratulations to you and your implementation. Travis, well done on just being an amazing coach, an amazing resource, and somebody that just understands the big picture. And it's really cool for me to take a step back and just to watch you guys work your magic. And it's been really fun for me to hear, Kendall, just you come back to life. You're the person I met in 2015, right? You really are that person. Actually, I think you're better today than you were then. Because I actually believe back then you're still just getting pounded by the CrossFit shit. You were able to live through it, but you were still getting hit with it, right? And there was a lot of undue stress, and that's not for this time, but and Travis, dude, just hands down one of the most intelligent people in the world. And when it comes to this, and when it comes to so many things, but obviously the implementation, I think, is the real magic. You have all the knowledge, but your ability to not bombard Kendall with everything that right away, and your ability to give it on a dose-by-dose basis, I really think is the magic where you've created success as a coach. So well done to both of you. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. And, guys, it's it's a back to basics conversation. It really is. And as we continue to go down this rabbit hole, like I said at the very beginning, I was like, guys, I didn't even want to do this podcast. And as we sat down and we started talking about it, it's like, you know what? It's a topic that far too many people are looking into without the understanding of context. And I hope that this podcast has provided you some insight into context. I hope it's made you look at everything you're pursuing, dietarily, physically, or otherwise, with a broader lens and with a much larger understanding of how and from a sequential standpoint, how you need to be implementing. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed. We are 5 minutes away from starting this year's Coaches Summit. So I hope you all have an amazing week. We'll talk to you next week.
See you.
Bye.